Al Qaeda began as a loose network of jihadists fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, but it would go on to reshape global security and define the early 21st century. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Al Qaeda carried out a string of major attacks, bombing US embassies in East Africa, striking the USS Cole, and nearly bringing down multiple transatlantic flights using liquid explosives disguised as soft drinks, a plot foiled by MI5 at the final stage, and the reason liquids remain restricted on planes today. No other non-state actor in history has had such a global impact. Its most infamous operation, 9/11, remains the most devastating terrorist attack ever carried out. A direct assault on American soil that killed thousands, plunged the West into decades of war, cost trillions, and radicalized a generation of Muslims. At the center of it all was Osama bin Laden, the cast-out son of a Saudi billionaire who transformed a scattered group of mujahideen into the most dangerous terrorist network the world had ever seen. This is the story of Al Qaeda's rise to global infamy, how it orchestrated its most devastating operations, and the relentless pressure that finally brought it down. Al Qaeda traces its roots to the Afghan War, where Muslim volunteers from across the Islamic world came to fight the Soviet occupation. Among the groups supporting this effort was the Maktab al-Khidamat, MAK, founded by Osama bin Laden, which helped raise funds, recruit foreign fighters, and coordinate their journey to the front lines. The MAK initially functioned as a recruitment center and propaganda outlet, but it soon expanded into a wider network, establishing offices in 30 US cities and operating across 35 countries, and developing military training camps and an infrastructure, which would later underpin a global jihadist effort. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan created what became, in effect, an international jihad university, heavily funded by the United States. Jihadists from across the Muslim world came together to train, forge networks, build bonds, and learn battlefield tactics. By 1985, the MAK had trained more than 5,000 mujahideen in Peshawar, drawing volunteers from Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Egypt, Yemen, Pakistan, Sudan, and beyond. The Soviet withdrawal in 1989 left thousands of hardened veterans returning home with no war to fight, until Osama bin Laden united them under a new banner of struggle, this time against the very power that had once funded their jihad, the United States. Osama bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia to public celebrations, hailed as a hero and a defender of Islam. With an international network of battle-hardened jihadists scattered across the Muslim world, all he needed was a new cause, and he found one when Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army invaded Kuwait on August 2, 1990. With Saudi oil fields now within striking distance of Iraqi forces, the kingdom faced a grave threat. Its military was badly outnumbered and ill-prepared to resist an Iraqi advance. Bin Laden offered to lead 5,000 jihadists in the defense of Saudi Arabia, but the royal family rejected his proposal and instead turned to the United States for protection, a decision that, in Bin Laden's eyes, was both a personal humiliation and a betrayal of Islam. For Bin Laden, the arrival of American troops on Saudi soil protecting the holy cities of Mecca and Medina was a desecration that could not be tolerated. He denounced the deployment as a crusader attack on Islam, declaring that the Arabian Peninsula had been occupied by foreign invaders. When Saddam Hussein was defeated in February 1991, Bin Laden's outrage only deepened. Rather than removing the American forces, the Saudi royal family allowed them to remain, a final betrayal that, in Bin Laden's mind, stripped the kingdom of all legitimacy. Throughout the 1990s, Bin Laden escalated his campaign of denunciation against both the Saudi monarchy and the United States, delivering fiery sermons, forging alliances with radical clerics, and recruiting a new generation of militants to his cause. Aware that his growing defiance would likely lead to arrest, bin Laden fled first to Pakistan. In April 1994, Saudi Arabia stripped him of his citizenship, and soon after, he relocated with his 4 wives to Sudan, which would become the new base from which he set about transforming Al Qaeda into a global force. Between 1992 and 1996, Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda established their base in Sudan, relocating at the invitation of Islamist theoretician Hassan al-Turabi, following an Islamist coup led by Colonel Omar al-Bashir. While bin Laden settled in Sudan, Saudi Arabia moved swiftly to isolate him, dispatching an emissary to demand the return of his passport, pressuring his family to cut off his $7 million annual stipend, freezing his assets, and publicly disowning him. Undeterred, bin Laden used his years in Sudan to lay the foundations of a global terrorist enterprise, Terror Incorporated, so to speak, where a network of businesses would sustain his army of jihadist fighters. Drawing on construction skills learned from his father, Mohammed bin Laden, who built one of Saudi Arabia's largest construction firms, Osama established his own company, Al-Hijra, for construction and development. The company partnered with the Sudanese military to undertake major infrastructure projects, including the construction of an airport at Port Sudan and the revolutionary highway connecting Khartoum to the coast. Beyond construction, bin Laden expanded into a wide range of industries, founding Wadi al-Aqiq, an export-import firm, acquiring shares in Al-Shamal Islamic Bank, and launching agricultural ventures that included cattle breeding and honey production. To boost international recruitment, bin Laden established Al-Qaeda's media wing, launching a weekly magazine called Newscast that reported on Islamic affairs and promoted jihad. At the same time, he engaged in what could be described as jihad diplomacy, forging alliances with around 20 Islamist groups engaged in guerrilla warfare and terrorism, whom he supported with funds, training, and weapons. Step by step, brick by brick, Al-Qaeda evolved from a loose band of ex-mujahideen into a structured international enterprise, sustained by profit-generating businesses, sprawling training camps, and a global network of operatives. Al-Qaeda's first known attack took place during this period, the 1992 hotel bombing in southern Yemen, orchestrated by Islamic Jihad, a local affiliate composed of former Afghan mujahideen. The group operated with financial and strategic backing from bin Laden, who aimed to target US forces in the region. The plan targeted 2 hotels, the Gold Mohur and the Mövenpick, believed to be housing American military personnel en route to Somalia. The operation, however, was poorly executed. While both bombs were planted, the device at the Mövenpick exploded prematurely during placement, injuring the bomber, his assistant, and a hotel security guard. The second bomb at the Gold Mohur Hotel detonated as intended, causing significant damage and killing an Austrian tourist and a Yemeni hotel employee. No US personnel were harmed. Despite its limited success, the attack had a psychological impact. The US government soon announced the withdrawal of military personnel from Yemen. Though the Pentagon downplayed the bombing's role in the decision, Al-Qaeda saw it as a victory, one that emboldened its leadership and reinforced the belief that the United States could be pressured into retreat. By mid-1996, mounting US pressure forced Sudan's leadership to end its protection of bin Laden, leaving him with no choice but to leave the country. With 3 wives, numerous children, and scores of loyal fighters, he set off for Afghanistan. While US pressure had forced his expulsion from Sudan, the move created a new challenge for American intelligence. In Sudan, he could be monitored. In Afghanistan, he was free to operate without surveillance. He quickly strengthened his relationship with the Taliban, deepening his ties with its leader, Mullah Omar, through the marriage of one of his daughters. In return for sanctuary, bin Laden provided the regime with financial support and a dedicated Al-Qaeda unit to assist in its fight against the Northern Alliance. This unit, known as the 055 Brigade, was composed of around 2,000 Al-Qaeda fighters embedded within Taliban forces. In 1996, after years of civil war following the Soviet withdrawal, the Taliban captured Kabul and declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Now, in a country ruled by fellow mujahideen, Osama bin Laden was free to declare a global jihad. He issued his declaration of struggle against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy mosques, calling on Muslims worldwide to take up arms against US forces. With that, bin Laden set in motion the first phase of what would become the War on Terror, a conflict that would engulf the West for decades. Soon after bin Laden's declaration of war, Al Qaeda carried out its first major attack, the 1998 US embassy bombings in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, an operation far greater in scale, coordination, and impact than anything the group had attempted before. The operation was carried out by a cell of experienced Al Qaeda operatives who had trained in Afghanistan and Sudan. Safe houses were rented in both cities, and explosives were smuggled in and sourced locally. The team assembled massive truck bombs, each packed with 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of TNT, hidden in wooden crates and placed in the beds of modified Toyota trucks designed to resemble ordinary delivery vehicles. On the morning of August 7, 1998, both trucks were driven to the US embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, each considered a soft target due to their exposed, lightly guarded urban locations. In Nairobi, the attackers attempted to bluff their way past security. When refused entry, they threw a hand grenade to create chaos, then detonated their truck bomb just outside the embassy gate. The explosion tore through the building, killing 213 people, mostly Kenyan civilians, while injuring over 4,000. In Dar es Salaam, the bomb exploded outside the embassy compound in a similar fashion, killing 11 and wounding 85. With over 4,000 injured and 12 Americans killed, including 2 CIA officers and a US Marine, Al Qaeda's coordinated embassy bombings marked its arrival on the global stage, demonstrating both capability and intent in a way that could no longer be ignored. The FBI launched its largest overseas investigation to date, dispatching agents within hours to track down those responsible. One of the attackers, Mohammed al-Ohali, fled to Karachi using a forged Yemeni passport with a photo that didn't match his face. He was quickly identified, captured, and extradited to the United States. Under interrogation, he revealed the names of other operatives, including bomb makers and planners, leading to the arrest of several co-conspirators. In 2001, 4 men, including Ohali, were tried and convicted in a US federal court and sentenced to life imprisonment. On August 20, 1998, President Bill Clinton ordered cruise missile strikes in what became known as Operation Infinite Reach, targeting Al Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, suspected by US intelligence of producing chemical weapons. Although the strikes dominated international headlines, they failed to eliminate bin Laden or meaningfully disrupt Al Qaeda's operations. If anything, they elevated his status in jihadist circles. He had orchestrated a coordinated international assault on the United States and lived to tell the tale. The embassy bombings confirmed Al Qaeda's operating model, coordinated high-impact attacks designed not only to capture global attention and inspire a new generation of jihadists, but also, above all, to provoke the United States into an open conflict. After the East Africa bombings, Al Qaeda's leadership began pursuing more strategic targets that could harm US forces while minimizing Muslim civilian casualties, partly in response to internal criticism that the 1998 embassy attacks had killed too many fellow Muslims. The next major operation was the bombing of the USS Cole, a US-guided missile destroyer attacked on October 12, 2000, while refueling in the Yemeni port of Aden. Planning began in 1999 under Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri, a Saudi national appointed by bin Laden as Al Qaeda's chief of operations for the Arabian Peninsula. Working with Jamal al-Badawi, an Al Qaeda operative based in Yemen, he oversaw the establishment of a logistical cell to support the attack. Al Qaeda's financial networks provided Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri with the funds to purchase a used fiberglass boat, an outboard motor, and large quantities of explosives. The team also secured a safe house overlooking Aden harbor to monitor US ship movements. Osama bin Laden, whose family had roots in Yemen, took a personal interest in the attack, viewing the US military presence as a direct affront. Nashiri traveled to Afghanistan to brief him, and bin Laden personally selected 2 suicide bombers who had trained in Al Qaeda camps. He later sent them to Yemen for further instruction in seamanship, navigation, and detonation, where they were placed on standby until the right moment. On the morning of October 12, 2000, the USS Cole arrived in Aden for a routine refueling stop. Alerted by a lookout, the Al Qaeda team loaded the boat with explosives and approached the vessel. At 11:18 a.m., the small craft approached the USS Cole. The 2 men on the fiberglass boat smiled and waved to the US sailors, feigning friendliness, before detonating the charge. The blast tore a 40-foot wide hole in the ship's hull, killing 17 US sailors and injuring 39 others. The crew fought to stabilize the ship and prevent it from sinking, eventually keeping it afloat until it could be returned to the United States for repairs. The attack provoked outrage in the United States, prompting President Bill Clinton to condemn it as an act of terrorism and the FBI to launch a major investigation. Yet no immediate retaliation followed. With the administration in its final months and the perpetrators not definitively identified in real time, the Clinton White House chose restraint. CIA Director George Tenet would later reflect, "We were at war, but we didn't realize it." In hindsight, the lack of a US response was widely seen as appeasement and emboldened Al Qaeda. Intelligence later revealed that bin Laden had expected a retaliatory strike and was reportedly frustrated when none came. His next attack, however, would change everything, successfully drawing the United States into a 20-year war. The 9/11 attacks were the culmination of Al Qaeda's long-standing strategy to strike the American homeland. The idea of using airplanes as weapons came from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who, in 1996, proposed a plan to bin Laden to hijack multiple commercial jets and crash them into high-profile US targets. Bin Laden approved the operation and served as overall commander, while Khalid Sheikh Mohammed acted as its chief architect and day-to-day planner. Central to the operation were 4 Western-educated extremists based in Hamburg, Germany, who were recruited by Al Qaeda and sent to training camps in Afghanistan. Among them, Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian engineering student, emerged as the leader of what became known as the Hamburg Cell. Atta and his colleagues obtained US visas in early 2000 and traveled to America to attend civilian flight schools, where they trained to fly large commercial jets. In the following months, additional Al Qaeda operatives, later known as the Muscle Hijackers, entered the US posing as students and tourists, whose role would be to subdue passengers and crew during the hijackings. Though September 11th was Al Qaeda's most complex operation, it was relatively inexpensive. The plot cost just $500,000, most of it spent on flight training, with the remainder covering rent and daily expenses for the 19 operatives who had infiltrated the US. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the 19 hijackers split into 4 teams, each assigned to a cross-country flight chosen for its large fuel load. Between 7:35 and 8:20 a.m. Eastern Time, they passed through airport security, where their small knives and box cutters went undetected. 5 hijackers led by Mohammed Atta boarded American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. Another 5, led by Marwan al-Shehi, boarded United Airlines Flight 175, also from Boston to Los Angeles. Hani Hanjour's team of 5 boarded American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles, while the final group, 4 hijackers led by Ziad Jarrah, boarded United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco. All 4 flights departed on schedule. None of the hijackers drew suspicion. They appeared to be ordinary passengers. Shortly after takeoff, each team launched its attack, using knives, pepper spray, and threats of a fake bomb to overpower crew and passengers. Within minutes, they seized control of the cockpits and redirected the planes toward their intended targets. The first crash occurred at 8:46 a.m., when American Airlines Flight 11 flew directly into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. The Boeing 767 tore through floors 93 to 99 of the 110-story skyscraper, igniting a massive fire. Hundreds were killed on impact, and those above the impact zone were trapped. New York and the world watched in shock as the North Tower burned. At 9:03 a.m., as live news cameras were broadcasting, United 175 slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center, striking floors 77 to 85. Meanwhile, at 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The Boeing 757 penetrated the western side of the U.S. military's headquarters, killing all on board and 125 military and civilian personnel on the ground. A section of the Pentagon collapsed and burned. The fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was delayed and hijacked later than the others. Its target was believed to be the Capitol or the White House in Washington. However, by this time, passengers on Flight 93 learned via phone calls of the other hijacked plane's fate and decided to fight back. Close to 10 a.m., passengers stormed the cockpit of Flight 93, struggling with the hijackers. In response, the hijacker rolled the plane and, realizing they would be overpowered, crashed the plane deliberately at 10:03 a.m. into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing everyone aboard. Within hours, U.S. intelligence agencies concluded that Al Qaeda was behind the attacks, and just days later, Congress authorized the use of military force against those responsible. NATO also invoked Article 5 for the first time in its history, declaring that an assault on the United States was an attack on all member states. The geopolitical response was immediate. The U.S. assembled an international coalition and on October 7th launched Operation Enduring Freedom, the invasion of Afghanistan, after the Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden. By every measure, September 11th was the most successful terrorist attack in history. Nearly 3,000 people were killed, the World Trade Center was destroyed, and the Pentagon, the nerve center of the U.S. military, was directly hit. The immediate damage exceeded $10 billion, but the long-term impact was far greater. Al Qaeda succeeded in provoking the United States into a global war on terror that would span decades, cost nearly $8 trillion, and help radicalize a generation of militants across the Muslim world. Although Al Qaeda never carried out another attack on the scale of 9/11, it remained operational and supported several smaller plots abroad. Many of these were either inspired by its ideology or executed by affiliated groups with Al Qaeda's backing. The 2002 Bali bombing was carried out by Jamaah Islamiyah, a Southeast Asian extremist group, and financed by Al Qaeda, which provided approximately $50,000 to rent a safe house and build the explosives. The safe house was used as a bomb factory, where over several weeks, the cell constructed a suicide vest and a large car bomb using a Mitsubishi van. On the night of October 12, 2002, the attack unfolded in Kuta, a busy tourist district. At 11:05 p.m., a suicide bomber detonated his vest inside Paddy's pub, killing himself and several patrons. Seconds later, as crowds fled onto the street, the van exploded outside the Sari Club, triggering a fireball that destroyed the nightclub and nearby buildings. In total, 202 people were killed, including 88 Australians, 7 Americans, and dozens of Indonesian civilians. In 2003, Al Qaeda shifted its focus to Saudi Arabia, launching an insurgency against the ruling regime and its Western allies. On May 12th, a Saudi-based Al Qaeda cell carried out a coordinated assault on 3 residential compounds in Riyadh, linked to U.S. personnel and interests. At Dorat al-Jadawel and al-Hamra, militants opened fire on security personnel before detonating vehicle bombs near housing blocks, killing and injuring residents and damaging nearby buildings. The most devastating strike targeted the Vinel compound, home to U.S. defense contractors training the Saudi National Guard. After shooting the guards at the entrance, The attackers drove a truck packed with explosives deep into the compound and detonated it, killing 35 people, including 9 Americans, and injuring dozens more. Aside from September 11th, the deadliest Al Qaeda-inspired attacks took place on European mass transit systems in Madrid and later London. On March 11, 2004, a group of mostly North African extremists carried out coordinated bombings on Madrid's commuter rail network. Though not directed by Al Qaeda's core leadership, the attackers were ideologically inspired by bin Laden and radicalized by the US invasion of Iraq. The cell, led by Jamal Ahmidan, a former drug trafficker, began plotting in late 2003, funding the operation through drug sales and petty crime. Explosives were obtained by trading hashish for dynamite, which was then smuggled into Madrid in hidden car compartments and stored in a safe house. On the morning of March 11, 2004, 10 bombs were placed on 4 commuter trains heading into central Madrid during rush hour. The attackers exited at pre-arranged stops and used mobile phone alarms to detonate the devices at 7:39 a.m., killing 191 people and injuring over 1,800. A nationwide manhunt ended nearly a month later when police tracked several suspects to an apartment in Leganés. As officers entered, the terrorists detonated explosives, killing themselves and 1 police officer. To date, the attack remains the deadliest terrorist incident in Spain's history. Like the Madrid bombings the year before, the July 7, 2005 attacks in London targeted the public transport system during rush hour to maximize casualties. The plot was carried out by a cell of British Islamist extremists who were inspired by Al Qaeda. The group consisted of 4 men from West Yorkshire: Shehzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay, Hasib Hussain, and Siddiq Khan, who acted as the ringleader. Khan and Tanweer traveled to Pakistan in 2004 for training at Al Qaeda-run camps. Operational security was tightly maintained, with knowledge of the plot confined to the 4 bombers, allowing them to evade MI5 surveillance. Bombs were assembled using household chemicals, which had been stockpiled over months to avoid raising suspicion. Meanwhile, a reconnaissance trip to London was conducted on June 28th to assess the security of the British underground network. With every precaution to avoid detection taken, the group filmed martyrdom videos, which would be played upon completion of the attack, and set on July 7th from Leeds to London, arriving at King's Cross Station early in the morning. Entering the underground tube system on separate lines, 3 bombers detonated at 8:50 a.m. on separate trains, whilst the last bomber blew himself up on a double-decker bus nearly an hour later, killing 52 and injuring more than 700. Not all of Al Qaeda's attacks were successful. In August 2006, MI5 foiled the so-called liquid bomb plot, a plan to detonate explosives on multiple transatlantic flights from the UK to North America. The cell behind the plot was a group of young British Muslims, mostly of Pakistani descent, based in East London, who were radicalized by the US war on terror. The plan was to simultaneously bomb as many as 7 to 10 airliners over the Atlantic, potentially killing around 2,000 to 3,000 people, rivaling 9/11 in death toll and crippling air travel. The timing was aimed for late summer 2006. Some analysts believe Al Qaeda leaders wanted an attack around the 5-year anniversary of 9/11 to show they were still capable. The transatlantic plot was a joint effort between UK-based extremists and Al Qaeda core figures in Pakistan. Operational planning in Britain was led by 25-year-old Abdul Basit, with Asad Sarwar serving as the chief bomb maker. Both were in communication with Al Qaeda leaders in Pakistan's tribal areas, primarily through Rashid Rauf, a British Pakistani operative with ties to Al Qaeda and the Kashmir-based militant group Jaish-e-Mohammed. On the logistics side, assembling the devices was a complex task. Their goal was to create an explosive liquid that could be mixed on the plane and hid in drink bottles to appear innocuous to airport screeners. Unbeknownst to the plotters, MI5 had been surveilling them for months, installing wiretaps and hidden cameras inside their bomb-making flat. The plan was for around 8 bombers to carry the devices in hand luggage onto 7 or more flights, leaving the same day from Heathrow Airport's Terminal 3. Once airborne and over the ocean, each pair of conspirators would assemble and detonate their bomb. Assembly involved one man going to a lavatory with the drink bottle and 2 liquids to start the reaction. On August 6, 2006, one of the key plotters received a message from Pakistan believed to be a signal to proceed. In response, British authorities moved quickly and launched Operation Overt in the early hours of August 10th, raiding homes across London and arresting multiple suspects. The plot led to an immediate ban on liquids in hand luggage, a restriction that remains in place today. Terror threat levels were raised to critical in the UK, and the plot's exposure drew attention to Pakistan's tribal areas as a centre for global jihadist planning, increasing pressure on Islamabad to act. The Transatlantic aircraft plot marked Al Qaeda's last significant attempt to carry out a large-scale attack in the West. From that point on, its plots were increasingly disrupted in their early stages, and its operational capacity steadily declined. While the group was linked to smaller attacks in the years that followed, such as the 2008 Danish embassy bombing in Islamabad and the 2015 Charlie Hebdo shooting in Paris, it never again mounted a mass casualty attack on the scale it had achieved in the early 2000s. So why did Al Qaeda collapse and fragment in the end? Despite carrying out some attacks after September 11th, Al Qaeda was never the same. In its prime, the group operated under a centralized command led by bin Laden and a Shura Council, which coordinated complex international operations. With a safe haven in Afghanistan, it had the space and freedom to train fighters and plot increasingly ambitious attacks, demonstrating its global reach and growing influence. The US-led invasion of Afghanistan in October 2001 swiftly dismantled Al Qaeda's base of operations as American forces bombed and overran its training camps and command centers, scattering fighters and destroying the infrastructure it depended on. Alongside the destruction of Al Qaeda's infrastructure, the United States launched a relentless manhunt. In the 2 years following 9/11, US and allied operations killed or captured nearly 2/3 of the group's senior leadership and killed more than 3,000 operatives worldwide. Forced into hiding along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, bin Laden and his deputy, Ayman al-Zawahiri, could no longer lead effectively. Their isolation coincided with the rise of US drone warfare, which targeted and killed mid-level Al Qaeda commanders seeking refuge in Pakistan's tribal areas. This steady elimination of operatives critical to planning and executing attacks gradually eroded the group's operational capacity. While drone strikes had already hampered Al Qaeda's ability to recruit and retain operatives, the death of Osama bin Laden in a US Navy SEAL raid in Pakistan in 2011 delivered a far more devastating blow. Bin Laden had been more than just a leader. His charisma, vision, and unique ability to unite jihadist factions made him irreplaceable. Zawahiri lacked bin Laden's charisma and authority, and as Al Qaeda's central leadership weakened, he struggled to maintain control over the broader movement. With its core capabilities degraded, Al Qaeda shifted to a decentralized model in which local, semi-autonomous groups operated under its banner, often without direct funding or strategic oversight. These affiliates aligned with Al Qaeda's ideology, but increasingly acted independently, pursuing their own local objectives and at times publicly shunning Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda in Iraq, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, grew increasingly autonomous before splitting to form the Islamic State. A similar pattern emerged in Syria, where Al Qaeda's affiliate Jabhat al-Nusra, led by current President Ahmed al-Sharaa, rebranded as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to distance itself from Al Qaeda and gain local legitimacy. The emergence of ISIS did not help either, splitting the global jihadist movement between 2 rivals, one aggressive and ascendant, the other weakened and increasingly irrelevant. Relentless Western pressure in the aftermath of 9/11 shattered the original Al Qaeda model. The world became a far more difficult place to carry out mass casualty attacks, as security architecture was overhauled, cockpit doors were reinforced, air marshals deployed, and passenger screening made significantly more rigorous. Terror financing laws were tightened, and terrorist mobility was severely restricted through biometric checks, international watch lists, and expanded intelligence sharing. In essence, September 11th was Al Qaeda's final major act. The group had accomplished much of what it set out to do, drawing the West into wars that cost trillions and would last decades, destabilizing entire regions and radicalizing thousands. What followed were smaller, scattered attacks inspired by Al Qaeda, but nothing ever matched the scale or impact of that day. Al Qaeda peaked on September 11th and never recovered. Do you think the world see another group like Al Qaeda? Let us know in the comments below. I have been your host, Albert. If you have enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe, and until next time.